A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Here ends the reading. I know many of you are familiar with Thomas Merton. Known for his spiritual writings, such as the classic spiritual autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain, and his commitment to social activism and interfaith dialogue, many people consider Thomas Merton to be a saint, which makes this conversation all the more interesting and appropriate, as today we celebrate All Saints' Day on the Episcopal Church calendar. Shortly after he converted to Catholicism in the late 1930s, Thomas Merton was walking down a New York City street with his Jewish friend, the poet Robert Lax. He asked Merton what he wanted to be, now that he was Catholic. "I don't know," Merton replied, adding that he simply wanted to be a good Catholic. To which Lax responded, "What you should say is that you want to be a saint," which totally blew Merton away. "How do you expect me to become a saint?" Merton asked him. Lax said, "All that is necessary to be a saint is to want to be one. Don't you believe that God will make you what he created you to be, if you will consent to let him do it? All you have to do is desire it." Thomas Merton realized his friend was right. He would go on to become one of the greatest spiritual thinkers and writers of the last century, and Robert Lax would later convert to Christianity himself. And those words that Robert Lax spoke to Thomas Merton ring true for all of us, and speak to our calling as Christians. You should want to be a saint, and to be one, all you need is to want to be one. But how is that? I'm constantly falling short. I'm nowhere close to being blessed if this gospel passage is what we should go on. For as long as I can remember, ever since I was a little boy in church, I feel like I have heard the Beatitudes. I probably had to memorize them at some point. And it seemed like everyone around me loved this passage. But if these are the standards by which we will be measured, well, I think I'm in trouble. Meekness and mercy, pureness of heart and peacemaking. Dang, how often do I come up short? This is why I am so thankful for the examples of the saints. While we might look up to them and aspire to be more like them in their holiness and their devotion to God, we might also appreciate them just as much for how they remind us of ourselves at times. For the saints, holy women and men, are also unfailingly human and flawed. Look at some of the most highly regarded ones. Peter denied the Lord multiple times. Paul supported killing disciples and was probably on the front row when Stephen became the first Christian martyr. Augustine exhibited some questionable morals and was a womanizer. These are just a few examples, and yet all of them, saints. So what's the deal? How can we consider such imperfect, mistake-prone, misbehaving, in some cases, downright awful people to be saints? Well, that's the point. The saints were all real, genuine human beings in all the messiness that comes with it. They were wonderful, faulty, flawed people, just like we are, whose love of God and trust in their faith endured alongside their human failings. They did not always embody the Beatitudes perfectly either. But here is something that distinguishes the saints. Their falling short at times didn't stop them from trying. As complicated and as broken as some of the saints are, they still had faith which carried them through, and even with their brokenness allowed them to strive to serve God and others. Part of what makes today significant is that it serves as a reminder that God takes all sorts of people who make mistakes, but who have faith and who at some point in their lives say, God, I want to be closer to you. God, I offer myself and my gifts to you. God, I want to make this world around me a better place. Most of us are familiar with some of the amazing saintly stories of the church. How John was beheaded and Stephen was stoned and Francis got the stigmata. And when you hear stories like these, you can't blame Thomas Merton, or anyone for that matter, for not really being eager to be a saint. Sometimes being a saint hasn't necessarily meant a happy ending. But those are the stories we hear about. There are countless stories, millions throughout the centuries that we don't. They are the anonymous saints who go about their daily lives quietly, peacefully, joyfully, finally entering into the fullness of grace without doing anything overly dramatic, but beautiful nonetheless. Living the gospel, living the Jesus way the best that they can. They are the unsung saints. Marlene Brooks, a 37-year-old property manager in the small town of Park Hills, Missouri, came home one day to find a handwritten letter from someone she had never met. It was such a heartbreaking letter that years later she still has a hard time reading it. Yet such a heartfelt letter, she still carries it wherever she goes. It says, Ms. ? Would you consider to become my friend? I'm 90 years old, live alone, and all my friends have passed away. I am so lonesome and scared. Please, I pray for someone. Signed, Wanda Mills. The return address was a house across the street and 2 doors down. A house so quiet, Marlene didn't even think anyone lived there. As she read the letter, her eyes teared up. Her own grandmother, who had raised her, had died alone in hospice, which still bothered her. This felt somewhat like an opportunity for redemption. The next day, she and a friend brought cupcakes to Wanda. She was excited that we came over there and we sat and talked for about an hour, Marlene recalled. Wanda, who has trouble walking and uses oxygen, told her that she hadn't left her house in 7 years and relied on caregivers who came daily. But they weren't the same as having friends. This was the beginning of what would become a dear friendship. Wanda is now in a nursing home, and Marlene and her husband and sons visit regularly. But it didn't stop there. Marlene began to wonder how many others out there were living like Wanda, unknown to their neighbors. She took a picture of the letter and posted it on Facebook, urging people to make sure to check on their neighbors and inviting them to send letters to Wanda. Then she had an idea. Why not invite people to write to more people than just Wanda? So she started a Facebook group called Pen Pals for Seniors, offering to match participants with older people who want to correspond by mail. In a little more than a month after she started it, around 6,000 people had responded. Marlene Brooks found a calling. And it seems Wanda just happened to write that letter to the perfect person. What a coincidence. Or not. Somebody sent her, Wanda said. And who sent her, she was asked? God sent her. So you might ask yourself the question, where is God sending me? The message of All Saints' Day is that these unknown saints are just as worthy as the ones who are known. It brings to mind the final verse of one of my favorite hymns, often sung on All Saints. I sing a song of the saints of God. The final verse goes, they live not only in ages past, there are hundreds of thousands still. The world is bright with the joyous saints who love to do Jesus' will. You can meet them in school, or in lanes, or at sea, in church, or in trains, or in shops, or at tea. For the saints of God are just folk like me, and I mean to be one too. They look like us. They look like the people we pass on the street. If they can be holy, can't we all? How do we gain membership into that saintly club? As Robert Lax explained to a man whom some people today consider a saint, all you really need to be a saint is to want to, and God will do the rest. Amen.